Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, in the wake of the preseason opener, Chris Finch made more comments regarding how the Timberwolves rotation will be longer and will look different than it did last year. We'll talk about what he said and why that underscores something we've talked about a lot on the show, plus more secondary playmaking by secondary ball handlers for the Wolves this year, how they can get offensive creation out of non-point guards. It's all upcoming next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Tuesday, everybody. The Timberwolves, I guess, happy game day. That's what we say during the season. It's preseason game number 2 tonight. Wolves-Pacers. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show today. As the Wolves preseason schedule rolls on, they're back in Minneapolis, playing at Target Center after being in San Diego for the game on Saturday and in California the last few days. A big thank you here off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. And you can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A quick rundown of what we're doing today. Chris Finch talked to the media on Monday and kind of just really continues to underscore what he said in the past. And he said over the summer, I think it was during Summer League, or maybe it was post-draft availability in June, when he talked about how the Timberwolves would have a longer rotation this year. And he's given more and more context to that. And I think especially in the wake of Saturday's preseason win over the Nuggets, everybody feels pretty good about the idea of the Wolves' depth. It's a little silly, admittedly, because it's one preseason game where not everybody played. And again, preseason and guys are playing a quarter to a quarter and a half on the Nuggets side. But still, it's what we have to go off of. Its recency bias, admittedly. But I think there's still some stuff to glean from that. As we talked about on Monday's show, we talked a lot about the guys who are most impressive on Saturday. And so we'll talk a bit more about that in the context of what Finch said. Plus, I want to look into some of that secondary creation and ball handling. We talked about Terrence Shannon Jr. on Monday's show, but I want to talk a bit about Jaden McDaniels today as well. So all that is upcoming here on today's show. In fact, let's go ahead and jump in. Let's talk about what Chris Finch said in his media availability on Monday following this weekend in San Diego. He talked about playing up to 10 guys per night. And remember, most nights last season, Minnesota played 8. It was the starters plus Reid plus Dante DiVincenzo and the now departed Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And I said on the show very early on this offseason, look, 9 and 10 aren't going to be locked in. Like TJ Shannon's probably number 8. And I said that back in June, July. But who are 9 and 10 going to be? Some combination of Jalen Clark, Rob Dillingham. Maybe it's Joe Ingles. Now, I feel like we could say maybe even Jean Beringer with how impressive he's been in Summer League and what the Wolves clearly think of him already. And Chris Finch now agrees with that, or at least is saying this publicly. His quote from Monday was, quote, whoever plays at 9 or 10, meaning 9 or 10 in the rotation, might be different every night amongst a small group of guys. So they got to be ready. They got to stay sane and stay focused on what the main task is. End quote. It's exactly what I've been saying all summer. You're not going to play 10 every night. In fact, most nights you're probably only going to play 9. So of that trio, very likely that trio is Terrence Shannon Jr., Jalen Clark. Call TSJ number 8 in the rotation, call Jalen Clark 9, and call Rob Dillingham 10. If you're only going to play 9, one of those 3, and probably one of the 2, Jalen Clark or Rob Dillingham, isn't going to play. And maybe if it's a big lineup, depending on who the opponent is, if you need some ranginess and some shot blocking, some paint protection, it's Jean Beringer. Now, maybe not against teams that are going to play in the post, not against the Bulls or the Nuggets, for instance. Beringer may not play because of those matchups against true bigs, true back to the basket bigs. It's just going to depend on who the opponent is. And I love that Chris Finch is saying it. I think he's saying all the right things. And the Timberwolves appear to have the right approach when it comes to this, because you can't one size fit all it. And honestly, the Wolves did try and do that last year. Remember at the very beginning of the season, Joe Ingles was in the rotation for the first 2 weeks. It was 5 games or so. And then he was out. Briefly, it was Josh Minot, and then he was out. And then it was you know what? We're just going to roll 8. And then what happens? When you get guys that inevitably get injured and miss time, now you've got guys playing that are not used to playing at all. And there's some advantage to hey, we're playing 9, and tonight you may not play Jalen Clark, or tonight you may not play Rob Dillingham, but you might tomorrow. on the second night of a back-to-back, depending on who we're playing. And maybe Mike Conley will sit and you'll both play because it's the second night of a back-to-back or whatever the case might be, or he'll play a lot less. So I think making sure you've got 10 plus guys engaged and kind of rotate them in and out of the end of the rotation is the right approach there. And I Chris Finch openly coming out and saying that I think is also healthy. And I'm sure they've said it behind closed doors to the players. And I think that's something the players could respond to. I think Rob Dillingham, yeah, he'd want to be in the rotation every night. But if you tell him, hey, look, you may play tonight, you may not play tomorrow, you may play in three of our 5 games this week, but not all of them. I think he'd take that over playing I think he'd obviously prefer to play every night, but I think he'd take that over not knowing, and really never playing unless there's an injury. And then you have the added benefit, as I alluded to, of having these guys be prepped and ready in case they're needed for a longer stretch or in case they're needed in a pinch for a last minute for a close game. I think that's a really valid and important thing for Chris Finch to be open and honest about. I think publicly as well as behind closed doors. If you go deeper than 10, maybe it is Joe Ingles, depending on the opponent. If you need somebody, we're going to talk about shot creation and playmaking here in just a moment. Maybe it is Joe Ingles. Maybe if it's a more athletic team that wants to run, it's Jalen Clark and Rob Dillingham both. So you get the defensive Clark, the offensive Dillingham, and they both can play with pace. And Jalen Clark has looked good overall, comfortable at least offensively. I would say Summer League and the first preseason game. The shot's not going in, but he's making the right reads on offense. He can handle the ball a little bit. He's not a point guard, but I think that could be a good group for playing with some pace. You talk about a longer, more athletic team, not with traditional back to the basket fives, but a longer, more athletic team that wants to run. Then you are talking about a Jean Beringer. You don't go much deeper than that. Like, we don't know about Leonard Miller. He's out for at least another week with the finger injury. Rocco Zakarski's a two-way guy. Tristan Newton's a two-way guy. Like, those guys aren't playing. So I do think that's kind of it. And we'll see with Johnny Juzang. I mean, who knows? If he makes the team, remember, he's got that partial guaranteed contract. Or actually, we don't know technically. It's probably a non-guaranteed contract. Bones Highland has the partial guarantee. Could those guys factor it? It's possible. They both played very well on Saturday. I think it's unlikely, but it's possible. And Minnesota has options. Like, there's nobody that you would sit and say they're not going to play as part of they're not going to be the 10th or 11th guy. I think once you get past that top 10, it's any combination of Ingles, possibly Juzang, possibly Highland, possibly Beringer. And Leonard Miller, he's probably on the outside looking in because of the injury now. But those guys are all possibilities to kind of, just barely slide their way into the rotation, or maybe not the regular rotation, but on the fringes of it, where they're the next man up, just like Luka Garza was last year. And he got to play a dozen, maybe 20 games as a rotation guy when there were injuries to Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert, in the February-March timeframe. So I think it's great that Chris Finch is saying it. I think he's right. It's what I've been saying on the show for a while, and it's the proper way to handle it versus like, hey, these are our guys. I think that's correct on Finch's part. All right, I want to talk about something actually John Krasinski highlighted in an Athletic article that posted following the Timberwolves preseason win on Saturday, related to specifically, he talked about Jaden McDaniels, and I think it kind of dovetails a little bit what I talked about with Terrence Shannon Jr. on Monday's show, related to secondary playmaking and really alternative options to traditional point guards initiating offense for Minnesota. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL season is here. In fact, last night was the end of week 5. Believe it or not, we're into week 6, the second week of buys in the NFL. It's crazy. And FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers could bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Looking ahead to the rest of the week, you got Eagles at Giants on Thursday night for the NFL. The Giants are 7.5-point underdogs at home. Makes sense. A disappointing loss this week after a big win the week prior. I'd probably go Eagles minus 7.5. That's minus 110. Looking all the way ahead to Sunday, so 5 days from now, there's some intriguing ones. Chargers on the road at Miami are just 4.5-point favorites. I feel like that. I thought that would be at least 5.5. I'd probably go Chargers minus 4.5. If you're looking at underdogs, I don't know. There aren't too many underdogs that I love with Lamar Jackson out. The Ravens are 7.5-point underdogs at home against the Rams. Stay away from that. Maybe the Panthers at home for the Cowboys plus 3.5. I don't know that I love that either, but if you really want to take take a home dog like the Panthers against the Cowboys, that might make sense. But anyway, check it out over at FanDuel. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. All right, so let's talk about the Jaden McDaniels piece. On Monday's show, I talked about Terrence Shannon Jr., and I thought that this was very impressive from him on Saturday. I'm not going to rehash everything I said on Monday's show. If you missed it, please go back and listen to it. But basically, there were a couple of plays that stood out where Terrence Shannon Jr. showed the ability to make reads off of dribble handoff action, getting downhill, some of the same stuff that we saw Anthony Edwards do when he was kind of figuring out the half court creation piece of his game early in his career. He still is early in his career, but like a year two-ish. And it's really that, like, once you turn the corner, and I think dribble handoffs are a great way to do this. I think it's a more simple version of an actual traditional pick and roll. It's essentially the same as being a ball handler in a screen and roll situation, but you have a better angle to the basket. It lends itself to downhill attacking, and there's less to survey. I think it just feels like a more clean read for a less experienced player. And Terrence Shannon Jr. is obviously an older second-year guy. He played 5 years in college. He scored a bunch in college. We get that. But this is a take the handoff and go. But then the next layer is slam on the brakes, plus or minus the free throw line, and make that read. Kick it to the weak side corner for a wide open three-pointer, which he did in this game. Dump it off to the guy in the dunker, or throw a lob to Jean Beringer or Rudy Gobert, whoever's roaming the baseline. That secondary read, without truly running a pick and roll, without truly, helming an actual set in the half court, on top of what he can already do in transition, is huge. And I didn't talk much about Jaden McDaniels on yesterday's show, but John Krasinski had a nice piece for The Athletic that came out on Sunday, in the following obviously Saturday night's game. And there are a number of things in there, some that I've already talked about, some that I haven't. But there's some stuff in there about Jaden McDaniels and his ability to initiate offense and what he showed on opening night. And I thought that was, or I say opening night, preseason, the preseason opener, we'll call it. I thought that was a really nice observation to kind of key in on. That he really initiated a lot of offense for this Minnesota team. And that's something that we may see a bit more of this season. And it just gives Minnesota another option. Again, the Shannon piece, I think, is more exciting because we just don't know, we don't have the data on him. And I think there's a pretty high ceiling, even given his age, what he can do. But McDaniels, again, kind of reiterating the Krasinski note, that McDaniels operated more pick and roll sets with Gobert, more traditional pick and roll sets. And we haven't seen a lot of him operating in the half court as a ball handler. It increased a little bit last year, and I'm going to pull up his overall assist rate here because, that's been trending in the right direction overall. And of course, the height, the size, the length on that potential pick and roll duo is just unreal. The assist rate, 9% last year for Jaden, which is up over 2 points from the year prior. It's easily a career high by more than a half percentage point. And 3 of his 5 seasons at the NBA level are sub 7% assist rates, and he was 9% last year. Well, the turnover rate decreased. Turnover rate went down below 10% for the first time in his career. So the usage rate was up, the assist rate was up, and the turnover rate was down for Jaden McDaniels. And we've talked extensively before about some of the other numbers that were up. The offensive rebound rate, which is a huge thing for Jaden. Easy, cheap buckets that way. I don't mean cheap in a bad way, like easy points. As a corner crasher, as an athletic rebounder, long rebounder in the half court, there's a lot on the table for Jaden McDaniels there. But if he can add this playmaking element, was it 3 years ago, Chris Finch kind of offhandedly made the Scottie Pippen loose comp about Jaden McDaniels? It's that type of half court creation, point forward type ability that I have. Jaden doesn't really have the handle. Obviously, he doesn't have a Scottie Pippen handle. He doesn't have the handle to really initiate that much offense. But we saw the dribble step back, which wasn't maybe the best shot selection from Jaden in the preseason opener, but those sorts of things that he could not have done with any level of, call it accuracy or lack of concern for a turnover in previous years. But he clearly is developing the ball handling piece a little bit, but also the overall reading of the floor is very impressive for Jaden. And if he's able to do some of this, and I don't know that it's necessarily going to be Jaden Rudy pick and rolls on a regular basis, because again, that's a massive pick and roll. And a lot of responsibility for Jaden McDaniels. It's fun to see that as a possibility. So you layer that in with the Terrence Shannon Jr. stuff, both big, in TJ Shannon's case, even more physical than Jaden, long, athletic ball handlers. And it allows Mike Conley to play off the ball, catch and shoot from the perimeter, or it allows Rob Dillingham to play off the ball, or it allows you to play with no traditional point guard on the floor. If TJ Shannon truly kind of absorbs that piece of the old Nickeil Alexander-Walker role, and maybe you're playing Jalen on the floor, because then Jalen Clark could be the point of attack defender against a smaller ball handling guard for the opponent. You don't have to counter with an offensive quote unquote point guard on offense, because you have some combination of Jaden McDaniels or Terrence Shannon Jr. who can comfortably initiate as secondary playmakers. And it kind of alleviates that, what otherwise would feel like a requirement to have a true point guard on the floor. And again, Bones Highland looked nice on Saturday, but the idea is not to have Bones Highland be a rotation guy. He's a clear minus defensively. There's obviously high usage, low efficiency concerns on offense. And, who knows with Rob Dillingham? Again, the best case scenario in all of this is Rob Dillingham's just a star, right? Like, I don't want to put that on him. But if Rob Dillingham is it from day one here this season, then this becomes less important. Still important. You still got to have guys that can do that stuff. And that, of course, is kind of the next frontier for Jaden McDaniels. He's like clearly, for the first time, a clearly plus player, a winning player. And I know he didn't make the all-defensive second team this past season like he did the year before, but the offense grew so much this year that he's just overall a better player. And as long as he doesn't regress when it comes to foul committing on the defensive end of the floor, and he continues to kind of develop and exercise that playmaking muscle, there's a lot of upside for him offensively. And it's another reason why I've said this quite a bit. Minnesota's offense could very well continue to improve. I think one of my bold predictions was the Wolves offense taking a leap into the top 5 this year. And I think it's natural for people to assume, they lost Nickeil. We're seeing all these people say the Wolves are the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th best team in the West. Other than losing Nickeil, like, why would Ant get worse? Why would Jaden McDaniels get worse? Why would Reid get worse? Why would this team that had a point differential 5 wins better than where they ended up last year, and they lost 7 more games than they did the year before, why would this team keep regressing? It just doesn't make sense. Nickeil Alexander-Walker's a nice player, but we're talking 22 or whatever minutes per game out of the entire body of the rotation with young, improving talent like Ant and Jaden and Reid, and then the next wave, potentially the upside of a Rob Dillingham, of a TJ Shannon, of a Jalen Clark. It just seems silly to me. I digress a little bit on the team performance, projection, the win total stuff, the 49.5 wins set as the over-under for the Wolves this year. I just think it's nuts. I think there's a lot more upside to this team than is being really seriously considered. All right. I want to close today's show by talking a little bit about Wolves Pacers tonight from Target Center. We'll preview that a little bit. It's the Pacers' first preseason game. We'll do that. We'll take a peek ahead at the rest of the week, and that's how we'll close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Monarch Money. Most people cannot name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. It's true. There's a ton of great tools within Monarch Money that will help you be smarter with your money. Simply put, don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNBA. All right, let's close today by talking about the preseason schedule here moving forward. Minnesota takes on the Pacers tonight. Indiana has not played a preseason game as of yet, so this is their first taste of preseason action as a team. Of course, Indiana is sans Tyrese Halliburton for the season, and this is a team that if you want to talk about teams that definitely didn't get better this offseason, you could definitely point at the Pacers. The sign and trade with Miles Turner going to Milwaukee, that's a huge loss for them. They also lost Thomas Bryant, who's a big part of the rotation. And that it was it. They really didn't add anybody. They got Jay Huff in a trade with the Grizzlies. That's it. Like there's no other significant moves that the Pacers made. And this is Rick Carlisle is a fantastic coach. This is probably still something close to a 500 team, just simply because he's great and he always does more with less. That's just kind of what Rick Carlisle does. So I think they're still going to be a very good team this year. Not very good, a good-ish team this year. We'll say that. Now, of course, it's preseason, so who knows? But overall, this profile, this team, you look at some of the things they didn't do well last year. Like one of the things that they didn't do well was offensive rebound. They were second to last in the league in offensive rebound rate. Depending, no matter where you look, actually, Basketball Reference, Cleaning the Glass, they were second to last in offensive rebound rate. And you look at the guys who were their only good offensive rebounders. Thomas Bryant was number one by far, and he's gone. Thomas Bryant is gone. He's not on the roster anymore. He's with the Cleveland Cavaliers. He was their only guy that had a greater than 6% rebound rate, other than Johnny Furphy, who only played in 50 games, and Enrique Freeman, who only played 180 minutes in 22 games and is now in the Timberwolves on a two-way contract. Those guys are both 6.8%. Other than that, Pascal Siakam's 5.9%, and then it's Miles Turner. So if you want to say just rotation guys, they lost three of their top four, actually two of their top three in offensive rebound rate, including their number one, who's by far their number one. So this team is not offensive rebounding. It's kind of the opposite of what Minnesota did. Minnesota's progressively rebounded more on the offensive end. They began to do that in January of last year. And the Pacers have gone the opposite direction. So all that to say, don't worry about the Pacers on the offensive glass. Now, overall, of course, the Pacers were fantastic getting to the finals last season. And, if it's not for the Halliburton injury, who knows how that ultimately all turns out. In the regular season, this was a 50-win team. Their differential was not as good as Minnesota's, but this team just continued to improve, and Halliburton was fantastic in the playoffs. Defensively, they were pretty middle of the pack. They were 13th overall on cleaning the glass in points per 100 possessions, but they weren't a great defensive rebounding team either, and the opposing shot profile was not super great. They gave up a lot of three-pointers and committed enough fouls. They're middle of the pack there too, that they were just kind of an average-ish defensive team and barely a top 10 offense in the regular season. Now, it came together really entirely in the playoffs for them. In a admittedly weakened Eastern Conference, Jason Tatum getting hurt, the whole thing. They obviously still had to get past the Knicks, and I know Brunson was banged up, but still very impressive. In the playoffs, they were a top, well, obviously there were only, I guess if you include the play-in guys, the play-in teams, 20 playoff teams, but they were fourth in overall defensive efficiency. Excuse me, the Wolves were fourth. The Pacers were seventh in defensive efficiency in the playoffs, but they were second in offense. They got to the line a ton. Yes, Halliburton. They shot the ball great. This team's going to look completely different. So much of their identity was tied up into Tyrese Halliburton. And then secondarily, the only really inside toughness they had was Miles Turner and Thomas Bryant, and those guys are both gone and no longer in Indianapolis. So no idea really what to expect other than that Rick Carlisle is a great coach. So that'll be something to keep an eye on this season for the Pacers. In this game for Minnesota on Tuesday night, as of this recording, we don't know if anyone is playing or not playing. I would imagine the same three starters that didn't play Saturday, Mike Conley, well, Ant may play, who knows? Conley, Julius Randle, Anthony Edwards. It wouldn't shock me if Conley doesn't play again, but perhaps we see Ant and or Julius Randle in this game. Peeking ahead at the Timberwolves preseason schedule, they've got really an extra game compared to some of these teams. They play again on Thursday. That's at New York. I think that's actually, it's at Madison Square Garden on Thursday. So my guess is some combination of those three guys play in one of two of these games. And then even after Thursday at the Knicks, there's still three more preseason games next week, Monday, Thursday, Friday. So I would imagine of the 6 preseason games, we get to see most of the starters play in at least 3 of those games. So it's something we'll keep an eye on. And of course, on Wednesday's show, it'll be effectively a post-game pod, not exactly how we do it in the regular season, but we'll talk about the game in, as a whole, studs and duds, the whole thing on Wednesday's show, and we'll get you ready here for the rest of the week as well. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow at X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. We'll be a bit more active here moving forward as we get into the season on both X platforms, so definitely keep an eye out for that. A reminder as well, the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Show. Our guy, Josh Lloyd, does a fantastic job. I was on the show, I don't know, 6 weeks ago now to talk he did a preview show for each NBA team. And so I did a Wolves preview show in August. That was a ton of fun. The Locked On Fantasy Basketball show hosted by Josh Lloyd is the #1 fantasy basketball podcast, gives you daily tips, helps you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, this show is also part of that very same Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.